I'm here with L.S. Lowry's Going to the Mill from 1925. Really excited to have this in our forthcoming auction, partly because of its provenance, the story behind its ownership, but also because it's a really important and very early example of a classic Lowry theme of workers heading towards the factory. The painting was made in 1925, and this was bought in 1926 by the grandfather of the present owner, A.S. Wallace. He was the literary editor at the Manchester Guardian. He had published a sort of supplement that went with Manchester Civic Week, which was a week of civic events, civic pride, one of those things. They had an exhibition in which Lowry featured 3 or 4 works, and Mr. Wallace met Lowry during that time. They became friends. Wallace bought this picture from Lowry, and actually Lowry was so pleased with his reaction that he also threw in another picture as well for free, which the Wallace family kept, I think, until about the 1960s. I think the thing to remember at this time is that Lowry, who's one of our most famous, well-known, easily recognisable artists, in the 1920s was really struggling for an audience. People in Manchester weren't really kind of ready for this sort of vision of the city. And so for A.S. Wallace to actually not even recognise Lowry's work, but also offer to buy one, was really important to Lowry at the time. This painting was made 100 years ago. It's been in the same private collection for 99 years. It's never been offered on the market before. It was only ever been seen when it was loaned to a museum for about 10 years on a permanent loan. And I can't really think of another example really of a Lowry that hasn't been offered for nearly a century. The other thing that's really exciting about it is that this is the classic Lowry scene of workers going to the mill. You can see them all being drawn inexorably towards the gate, the mill gate here. This is Lowry's theme. It's the theme for which he gets really famous, but not really for another about 20 years or so. So this is a very early manifestation. He had his first proper exhibition in 1921, in which there was one mill painting. So if this is not the first Going to the Mill that he painted, it's certainly one of the earliest and probably one of the first he actually sold. Lowry's work of the 1920s is quite different from the Lowry that perhaps we're more familiar with the figures isolated against these famous white backgrounds. In the 20s, he was still exploring an almost impressionistic way of representing the city. He trained in sort of the decade before this picture was made with an artist called Adolf Vallet, who was a French impressionist who'd come to Manchester, was offering lessons, and Valette was drawn very much to the city for the smog, the smoke, the dirty buildings, figures looming out of the dark, lit only by streetlights. And so very early Lowry has this kind of impressionistic feel. And we can still see a little bit of it here in this picture. If you look at, I think, as you see the figures going into the mill, these are the kind of classic Lowry figures, each individually picked out, quite linear, but then as you go towards the mill gate, actually they start to dissolve into really just strokes of the brush, red, ochre, blue. And this is a very basically impressionistic way of painting, which has come from Valette. But of course, what makes Lowry makes him so important, so interesting, so modern, is that he actually basically veers through Impressionism, through Post-Impressionism, to find something of his own, which are these figures individually drawn out, given a life of their own, really. I think what's important when you look at Lowry is to not think of them as actual depictions of Manchester. They're not. It's much more relevant with Lowry to look at them as stage sets. He was hugely interested in the theatre, so this is definitely a set, but you've got the mill, you've got the chimneys, but then you've also got the evidence of, in the terraces here, of domestic life. So it's home and work, life and death, childhood, adulthood, all these kind of things are played out on these stage sets. And then when you look into the people, I mean, this I think is what makes Lowry brilliant, is that he can paint a crowd, you get a sense of the group of people, but within that, all the figures are individually picked out. And the people looked at him slightly as a naive painter, but he's not. He's really sophisticated. He just chooses to paint in this style. But even when you look at the way he renders the figures, the bend of the legs, the drops of the shoulders, the twists of the head, he's doing it almost with one brush stroke. As you look into a Lowry painting, it just reveals detail upon detail upon detail. So you get You get this chap here who is very much in the crowd, but he's got space all around him. You've got this lady here who's looking back out towards us, and again, it's just a couple of brushstrokes, but I think almost in every classic Lowry, he has one of his figures look out towards the viewer to pull you into the scenario. And I'm kind of fascinated too by this chap here with the hats and carrying what looks like a sort of folio underneath his arm. And I'm kind of thinking that that might be Lowry himself. He wasn't averse to putting figures that could have been him in his pictures, although he's never overt about it. So you've got a sense of a crowd that coalesces, comes together, falls apart, but within that crowd there are lots of individuals. So I think a combination really of it being an incredibly rare thing, a thing that nobody's really had a chance to see for 100 years, yet at the same time something that's really intensely Lowry is what makes having this painting here so exciting.